You may not get your flowers for a long time. This is an optimistic video though. Would your artistic pursuits be worth it if you didn't get your flowers while you were active? We all know that the artistic pursuit is a long one. You sign up for a lengthy, potentially painful road where you have no guarantee of success, and lack of validation for an extended period is discouraging, like dehumanizing even. But the thing is, anybody who feels that way is not alone. This is not a new situation, and you'd be surprised who is among that group. Names that have their flowers now but took a long, difficult road to get there. There's a lot that I could bring up when talking about this, but I want to give an optimistic take that the level that anybody is currently at doesn't really mean that much. And also, one's success or lack thereof at a specific moment has no real correlation with the quality of their art and how the culture remembers that art in the long term. The passage of time creates new needs and new perspectives that are unexpected. As a sillier example, could the guys in Smash Mouth have ever expected what All-Star would mean to the internet generation? It was a hit back in the day, but in recent years it's had a resurgence. Africa by Toto is another one of these. And there's a huge number of people who now know those songs very well who weren't even alive when they first became a hit. And they have their own relationship to the songs that's a product of their own time. And it's brought those songs new life that they're still writing. History is funny that way. You never know. Aside from individual songs, I'll give 3 examples of artists who got their flowers way late. 3 artists from the 60s and early 70s that I love very much. And I went with older examples because part of my point is how influence plays out over a long period of time. Nick Drake, a textbook example of an underappreciated artist in his lifetime. An amazingly talented acoustic guitarist and songwriter who wrote some of the most beautiful songs of his era. But even though he made 3 great albums in the late 60s and early 70s, he never got the success that he expected and deserved. He was a troubled guy, and his lack of success made him even more troubled. He ended up doing very little to promote, he rarely played live or did any interviews, and he passed at 26 from an overdose. It's a tragic story, but it does have a happy epilogue, because awareness of his music started to expand after his death, with many notable musicians from later generations citing him as a huge influence. Kate Bush, R.E.M., The Cure, Bon Iver. His songs have been used in well-known movies like The Royal Tenenbaums and Garden State, and Pink Moon was famously used in a car commercial in 1999 that skyrocketed his audience in the US, a full 25 years after he died. And currently, Nick Drake is sitting at more than 2 million monthly listeners on Spotify. His story is emblematic of the fact that the culture doesn't always give artists their flowers while they're doing their thing. As times change, what also changes are people's needs and people's tastes. Nick Drake probably couldn't even imagine how his music would one day be disseminated and appreciated. And this is a reason to be optimistic and to keep doing you. The Velvet Underground are another great example. Rock band from New York City in the 60s led by Lou Reed. At the time, they sold very few records. Their sound was deliberately confrontational and experimental in an age that wasn't really ready for it. Being ahead of your time just means that at the time, many people are not going to get it. Brian Eno has a famous quote about how their first album only sold 10,000 copies, but everybody that did ended up starting a band of their own, and they've ended up being one of the most influential bands in the history of rock, with their records being huge for the development of like a ton of subgenres. And now, you can't really write a book on the history of rock without talking about the Velvet Underground. And it's argued regularly that punk rock, alternative rock, indie rock, none of these things would exist in the same way today if the Velvet Underground hadn't done their thing. You can easily interpret a small audience as a commercial failure, but I think that transmitting your ideas to anybody at all is a huge win in itself. You never know who you're going to inspire. And those people might later down the line unlock an audience for your music that wasn't there before. The importance of certain ideas and sounds might not be appreciated for a little while, but that's a reason to be optimistic. They have a similar story to my last example, which is the Stooges, who in the late 60s, early 70s, they played this rough, crude version of 60s garage rock. They never had a hit, and received a lot of criticism. Look up some early reviews of the Stooges, especially their live performances, and you'll see what I mean. But later in the 70s, after they had broken up, punk rock happens. A new kind of rock that emphasizes roughness and crudeness. And the same things that the band got criticism for initially ended up being the most influential aspects of their music. Those early punk bands across the board cited the Stooges as a huge influence. This band that was like a novelty, a curiosity at the time that like not everybody knew about. The last song that the Sex Pistols played at their last show in San Francisco was a Stooges song. And if you think of the Stooges with like 60s standards of rock, yeah, maybe they're not a very good band. But if you think of them as a 70s band, they're so ahead of their time. Similarly to the Velvet Underground, they initially had a small audience, but eventually the world caught up. Any music that exists today that is remotely punk adjacent, you can kind of follow the family tree back to the Stooges. But if you travel back in time to 1970 and told somebody that the Stooges would end up being one of the most important acts of the century, which I think that they are, they would not take you seriously. Something that's misunderstood or even maligned in one era can come to be appreciated with later perspectives. Different generations have different experiences with music. The listening habits, the technology, the mediums, they're not going to stay the same forever. Now, to wrap up, I mean, realistically, as a musician myself, do I want to wait 50 years for my music to be appreciated? Of course, that's not ideal. But the point is, the value of my art, or anybody else's art, it doesn't hinge on the right now. Any musician who's putting stuff out today is sowing seeds for an audience that could very well be exponentially bigger ages from now. Again, history is funny, so I'll keep going. Why not?